Alright everyone, what's going on? Thanks for tuning back into the channel. I want to continue this series, The House That Jesus Built. And today I want to talk about the Tower of Babel. Babel is something that is pretty well known in the Bible. And hopefully today we can see how it connects to some Bible prophecy. And really today I want to teach that the New Jerusalem is a better Babel. Now there are some thoughts on whether or not Babel is local or whether or not Babel is global. And there are also some thoughts that'll connect back to Noah's flood on it being local or it being global. I don't really want to get a whole lot into that today. If I had to be pressed on it, I would probably lean more toward that it's local or covenantal. But that being said, I think we can still glean some things out of this. And if you don't know where you're at on that, then you can use some room to study on it. So, Genesis 11, you might remember that God gave Noah the commission to be fruitful and multiply, to fill the earth and subdue it. And one part of that, at least, means that Noah was to have an influence on the fact that he was a man who was in covenant with God and was to teach others about his God, Yahweh, and that they should worship him. But now you have a man named Nimrod who's risen up, and Nimrod has essentially started these 8 cities, led others astray, and now you have Babel, and what you have is a group of people who have gathered together that we begin to read about here in Genesis 11. And it says the whole earth had one language and one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said to one another, Come, let us make bricks, and bake them thoroughly. They had brick for stone, they had asphalt for mortar. Now, one of the reasons that I think that they did that was because they're aware of how God judged the last time. He judged through water, and essentially what they're going to do here is build a city that's tall enough to overcome a flood, but also be sealed with asphalt and pitch, exactly like Noah sealed the ark. And I would also make a note that that's exactly how Moses' basket, when he was in the water, how it was sealed. So the baking of the bricks, the using the frying, the using of the fire, will not allow them to be disformed. They'll stay consistent. And I think they have in mind what happened when God judged the earth back at the flood. So essentially, they were supposed to walk with God. Now they're not. Now they're trying to build a city essentially to get themselves back to God. Verse 4, they said, Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. And I take that to kind of be like Eden. So Eden was a place, but inside Eden was a garden. So in Jerusalem you had a city, but inside of the city you had the temple where God was. So now they have their city, and which is Babel, and their tower, or their place of worship, so to say, inside of the city, whose top is in the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. But the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language. And this is what they begin to do. Now, nothing that they propose to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down, confuse their language. Note that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. Now, I don't want to go into every detail of this story, but I want to make a couple notes. Number 1, the language is confused. Number 2, this was a city built from the ground up for men to try to reach God in that way. Number 3, they were scattered out all over the earth. Whether you take that global or whether you take that regional, I would tend to take that to be something that's regional, because what we see in Acts chapter 2 is going to be the exact reversal of the story of the Tower of Babel. Now, in Acts 2, I didn't put this in the PowerPoint, but at the very beginning in verses 1 to 4, we know that there were tongues. So tongues that were given, the Spirit falls, and tongues are given. And this word for tongues is the word glosse. And what I want to make a note of, and I don't know who's charismatic watching the video or not, I'm sure I'll get hammered by somebody, but the word that's used is glosse. These are known languages that now they can speak. They're speaking languages that they don't know, and people are hearing these people like Peter speak in a language that he can't speak, but they're hearing it in their own language. That's a biblical distinction I would make between the charismatic movement in our modern day culture and what biblical tongues were. So, you have exactly the opposite of what happened at Babel when they were scattered. Now you have these people from all over, and I think it's the scope of where they were scattered at Babel come back into Jerusalem, and now they can hear in different languages. They're not confused anymore. They can hear. There were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation under heaven. And I take that to be the scope of the Roman Empire, the scattering, which is why I would consider some locality to the story of Babel. And when this sound occurred, the multitude came together and were confused because everyone heard them speak in his own language. Notice again, these are real languages. Then they were all amazed and marveled, saying to one another, "Look, are not all these who speak Galileans? And how is it that we hear each in our own language in which we were born? Parthians and Medes and Elamites, those dwelling in Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the parts of Libya adjoining Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and proselytes, Cretans and Arabs. We hear them speaking in our own tongues the wonderful works of God." So they were all amazed and perplexed, saying to one another, "Whatever could this mean?" Now here's my caveat on this and on these gifts, okay? What's happening here is there was a city that was built, Babel. It was from the ground up, from people who weren't worshiping the Lord. So God comes down and he scatters it out over what I would call their known world, okay? That's essentially the city that was trying to connect men back into the presence of God. God is now going to build his city to connect men back into the presence of God, which is going to be the New Jerusalem. While that city is being built, these special gifts are in play for the building up of that city, the building up of the church until its completion when God's glory would come into it. Tongues were part of those specialized gifts as the gospel went out all over the known Roman world and everyone heard it according to Paul in Romans 10:18. The gospel goes out and this spiritual temple is being built. They were being built together, a dwelling place for God in the Spirit. And we, in our culture, depending on what your background is and where you grew up at. I remember I grew up in a Southern Baptist church, and I've spent all my life in Southern Baptist churches, and I hear people talk all the time about, that those gifts and those prophecies are no longer in play. And one thing that never really stood out to me was the terminus point for when those things have ended. And I always thought, boy, this is inconsistent that you guys are saying that we're in the last days, but these gifts aren't in play. Friends, I believe with all my heart you and I are not in the last days. The last days ended the old covenant age when Jerusalem was destroyed, and the New Jerusalem was being built during that time. Once that New Jerusalem was completed, these gifts vanished away. And what you could call that was the completion of the redemptive story, or to say it another way, when the perfect had come. And I think Paul understood this exactly that way in 1 Corinthians 13. Now remember, in 1 Corinthians 10, he's just stated that all of these things happened at the end of the age, and that the end of the age had come. Paul says here in 1 Corinthians 13:8, "Love never fails, but whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledges, it will vanish away." So tongues, prophecy, and knowledge, it was all going to dissipate or to go away. Well, when? Verse 9, "For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away with." So once the New Jerusalem was completed, then these gifts would no longer be in play. And I should have put it in here, but if you'll go back and look at when Moses was constructing the tabernacle and when Solomon was building the temple, there were those during the construction of those two things that were given essentially these supernatural gifts for the construction of the tabernacle and Solomon's temple. And those gifts went away once the completion happened. And I would venture to say the same thing. These gifts went away once the New Jerusalem was built, the house that was a better Babel. Daniel chapter 9, verse 24, something that we read was to seal up vision and prophecy. And then Luke 21:22 says, these are the days of vengeance when all things written would be fulfilled. So the sealing up of vision and prophecy happened at the end of the Old Covenant age, and that's when these gifts vanished away or dissipated off the scene. That's when I would say that they ceased, and I think that's consistent. If you're running around saying today that we're in the last days, then why would these gifts not be in play? Peter said in Acts chapter 2, this is what was prophesied by Joel, that in the last days your young men would dream dreams, your sons and daughters would have visions, yada, yada, yada. Well, once Daniel's 70 weeks end with the judgment on Jerusalem, then all of those things pass away, and vision and prophecy are sealed up. That's why Paul is predicting a terminus for these events. We see this story of the New Jerusalem, that it'll be the place of worship, even in beginning with Jesus in the New Testament. In John chapter 4, verse 19, I wanted to make sure I got this in this series, and is this the best place for it? I don't know, but I'm putting it in here right now just so you can see that this idea of the New Jerusalem was something that was coming and was going to be the place of worship. The woman said to him, Sir, I perceive that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, Mount Gerizim. The 10 northern tribes, once it split under Rehoboam, the 10 northern tribes worshipped at Gerizim. And you Jews say that in Jerusalem, where the temple was, is the place where one ought to worship. Jesus said to her, Woman, believe me, the hour is coming when you will neither on this mountain, the one he was standing on in Gerizim, nor in Jerusalem, where the temple was, worship the Father. There's a day coming, you're not going to worship either one of those places. Well, why? Because the better Babel was going to be built, and the better Babel was the place where God would dwell with his people, and they would worship in spirit and in truth, as the text there goes on to say. So there's a prediction of this New Jerusalem being built and that it's coming. And that happens once the old Jerusalem is vanished away and the true Babel is finished. Revelation 21, John said, Then I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem. Now watch this. Remember, Babel was from the bottom up, from earth back to heaven. But the New Jerusalem was pictured as coming down out of heaven. That's a reversal and a fulfillment of Babel from God, prepared as a bride, adorned for her husband. Hope that all helps you to see kind of the story of the Bible and the true and better Babel. Please like and subscribe to the channel down below. Thanks for tuning in. God bless you, and we'll see you soon.